Oye mi plegaria, te entrego carne que sangra, un corazón que late en miedo, un alma que grita en dolor.
This place is not what it seems. They hurt people who go against the parish. Please, you have to help us. Father will not let us leave. We're prisoners here. You are being manipulated.
I'm your flesh.
20 disturbing real-life inspired movies, 7 levels. From a graphic, realistic portrayal of Japanese war crimes to an authentic biopic of one of history's most psychotic killers. These are the most disturbing movies based on real events. We'll start with less unsettling movies, but as we get further in, they'll get even more uncomfortable and depraved. Let's start at the tip of the iceberg. Disclaimer. Level 1. Monster, 2003. Patty Jenkins' directorial debut Monster tells the harrowing tale of Eileen Wuornos, portrayed by Charlize Theron in an Oscar-winning performance that legendary critic Roger Ebert called one of the greatest performances in the history of cinema. The film begins in Daytona Beach, Florida, where Eileen, a woman working the highways, meets Selby Wall at a bar. Despite her initial hostility, Eileen sees something in Selby, a chance at genuine connection. Their relationship quickly becomes the emotional core around which the darker narrative spirals. The story takes its first violent turn when Eileen encounters Richard Mallory, who becomes her first victim on November 30th, 1989. In a deeply disturbing sequence, Mallory binds Eileen to a steering wheel, violates her with a tire iron, and pours gasoline over her. Fighting for her life, she shoots him multiple times, takes his money and car, and drags his body into the woods. Following this traumatic incident, Eileen attempts to find legitimate work, but faces rejection at every turn.
Fuck you, man. Yeah, fuck you.
Under pressure to provide for Shelby, she returns to her previous occupation on the highways. But her experience with Mallory totally transforms her outlook as she begins to view every client as a potential threat. What follows is a 9-month period where Eileen takes the lives of 6 more men. The movie never sensationalizes any of it. Instead, the film is focused more on the complex factors that created Eileen's reality.
I don't know if I can forgive myself for my...
After abandoning Victor Peter Seam's car following an accident, police eventually track down Eileen. On January 9, 1991, she's arrested at the Last Resort Biker Bar. Tyria Moore, played by the real-life Shelby, cooperates with police to elicit a confession, and Eileen is eventually sentenced to death. With a tiny $1.5 million budget, Monster grossed $64.2 million and received critical acclaim, as well as an Oscar for its lead actress. But what makes the movie so unsettling to us is that we understand her and we empathize with her. She wasn't born a monster. She became one thanks to trauma, desperation, and circumstance. Ted Bundy, 2002. Matthew Bright's 2002 independent biographical crime thriller Ted Bundy offers an unflinching look at one of America's most notorious criminals, chronicling Bundy's transformation from law student to one of history's most infamous villains. The film begins in Seattle in 1974, showing Bundy as a seemingly typical student at the Seattle University School of Law who works part-time at a crisis center. Beneath this charming facade lies a sociopathic misogynist whose behavior quickly escalates from voyeurism and petty theft to unspeakable acts against women. But this movie differs from other portrayals by focusing less on the investigation and more on revealing the animal beneath. While other adaptations around this time, like The Deliberate Stranger, emphasized Bundy's charisma that enabled him to gain victims' trust, Bright's film deliberately exposes the monster in all its ugliness, It takes an uncomfortably raw approach, showing how Bundy manipulated those around him, especially his girlfriend, who remained loyal despite his increasingly erratic behavior.
Why? Afraid somebody might find out the wonderful Ted Bundy's a thief?
You tell anyone that, I will break your neck, you hear me?
The film faced significant controversy for its explicit content. Critics argued that Bright had massively crossed the line from critiquing Bundy's charm to falling under its sway. Others condemned the movie for its exploitative nature, noting how it dwells on graphic violence while offering little, or basically no, psychological insight into Bundy's motivations. The film's use of lighthearted music during horrific scenes was also accused of being excessively disturbing and disrespectful. But maybe the most controversial element of all was the film's unflinching depiction of Bundy's necrophilic tendencies. In one particularly disturbing sequence, Bundy attacks a sleeping woman and subsequently engages in intimate acts with her remains. All of that was based on the real Bundy's admission that he would revisit victims' bodies to perform acts with the corpses until decomposition was advanced, but it doesn't make it any easier to watch. In fact, nothing about this movie is easy to watch. The film refuses to look away, showing Bundy's cross-country crime spree, which left at least 30 victims across multiple states. Michael Riley Burke's performance has been described as revolting and psychopathic, effectively conveying what women who encountered Bundy must have experienced. So actually, that's a pretty strong compliment for him. But Matthew Bright got a lot of criticism for his work, with many people accusing him of falling in love with his subject, rather than being critical of his violent spree. Level 2. Grim Love, 2006. Grim Love is a German movie that draws heavily from the disturbing true story of Armin Meiwes, the notorious Rothenburg. The story follows Katie Armstrong, an American student in Germany researching the case of a named Oliver Hartwin, who finds a willing victim in Simon Grombeck.
I'm your flesh. Are you?
But this is not a story told in any conventional way. The film employs a flashback structure, revealing how two profoundly lonely men ended up in this unthinkable arrangement. Oliver, raised by a domineering mother, developed an obsession with consuming human flesh, while Simon harbored intense self-loathing and a desire to be completely consumed by another person. These parallel narratives build toward their inevitable, disturbing collision. But under the strange cosmic connection of two lost souls is an uncomfortably authentic portrayal of an actual case. In 2001, Armin Meiwes, a computer technician, posted an online advertisement seeking a young, well-built man who wanted to be eaten. Bernd Jürgen Brandes answered the ad, meeting his future consumer on March 9, 2001 at Meiwes' farmhouse in Rothenburg, Germany. The film's most disturbing scene closely mirrors reality. After Brandes consumed and sleeping pills to dull the sensation, they attempted the unthinkable, removing and cooking part of Simon's body while he was still conscious. They tried eating this body part together, but after frying it too much, it became too tough to chew. While Simon bled profusely in the bathtub, Oliver calmly read a Star Trek novel nearby, as though all of this was completely normal. Later, Oliver ended Simon's life with a kitchen knife after kissing him goodbye. He proceeded to dismember the body methodically, storing portions in his freezer next to a takeaway pizza. Over subsequent weeks, he consumed approximately 20 kilograms of flesh, cooking it with olive oil and garlic. The real-life Meiwes was arrested in December 2002 after returning to his online board seeking more victims. Initially sentenced to 8.5 years in prison for consent-based killing, he was later retried and received a life sentence in 2006. Grim Love was banned in Germany shortly after its premiere due to its graphic content, but it did win multiple awards at the Sitges Film Festival. Gacy, 2003. Gacy is a 2003 direct-to-video movie following John Wayne Gacy, the notorious killer who took the lives of 33 young men in Chicago during the 1970s. The film opens in 1953 Wisconsin, where young John endures verbal and physical torment from his father during a fishing trip. This early trauma sets the stage for what would follow decades later. By 1968, adult Gacy served 18 months for a conviction in Iowa before settling near Chicago, where he would begin the attacks that would define his legacy. Gacy meticulously depicts the uncomfortable contrast of his existence, a respected businessman, family man, and community figure who occasionally performed as a clown at children's events. His political aspirations with the Democratic Party and neighborhood barbecues created the perfect facade for him to blend in with society.
Maybe even the next precinct captain.
Meanwhile, beneath his house, a crawl space harbored horrific secrets. The film portrays Gacy's methodology as it actually happened in real life. He would identify potential victims, often young men seeking employment. Offering construction work at his contracting company became his primary bait. Once at his home, Gacy would suggest showing them a magic trick involving handcuffs, a deception that allowed him to restrain his victims before ending their lives through strangulation or asphyxiation. But over time, he starts to grow concerned about the smell emanating from his crawl space filled with dozens of bodies. He has no choice but to eventually use concrete to conceal the evidence. The movie culminates with the investigation into a missing teenager named Tom who manages a narrow escape, leading police to discover Gacy's collection of watches and driver's licenses from his victims. The final scenes show authorities exhuming remains from that infamous crawl space. Like most direct-to-DVD movies, Gacy was not successful or liked, partly because the movie offers no insight into his mindset at all, or even any suspense. It just starts, does some disturbing stuff, and then ends. Freeway Killer, 2010. Freeway Killer is a crime horror thriller directed by John Murlowski that delves into one of California's most notorious criminals, William Bonin, who caused chaos in Southern California from May 1979 through June 1980, claiming at least 21 lives. The direct-to-video movie follows Bonin, a Vietnam veteran working as a delivery driver who targets young men and boys across Southern California highways. But what makes the film particularly disturbing is not just what Bonin did, it's how he operated with accomplices.
You had him, Bill. I'd have pitched in if it got too hairy.
Bonin grooms an insecure youth named Kyle Peterson, showing him photographs of previous victims before convincing him to assist with the abduction of a boy hitchhiking to Disneyland. This key scene illustrates exactly how Bonin cultivated accomplices through psychological manipulation, offering a sense of power and belonging to vulnerable individuals who just wanted to be someone. The real Bonin operated by luring victims into his van under false pretenses. He became known as the Freeway Killer because most bodies were discovered alongside California's extensive highway system. His actual accomplices included Vernon Butts, who was associated with 12 killings and later took his own life before trial in 1982.
During a 2-month trial, prosecutors presented 2 of Bonin's alleged accomplices, who testified that they had helped Bonin commit the crimes, and a local television reporter testified that Bonin confessed to him.
What Freeway Killer captures better than most other movies about killers is the terrifying ordinariness of Bonin's appearance. As one reviewer notes, the film serves as a cautionary tale for random young people who will just trust any stranger, and demonstrates that, no matter how friendly a sociopath may seem, they are chameleons and capable of anything. You can't trust anybody. The film portrays Bonin's eventual downfall when, after 9 days of police surveillance, officers caught him mid-attack on a 17-year-old inside his van.
I admit, I've always been kind of a loner, lonely type of guy. maybe that's why I was so easily reeled in.
Investigators discovered damning evidence, including restraining devices and a scrapbook of newspaper killings about his crimes. After spending 14 years awaiting execution, Bonin became the first California prisoner to die by lethal injection in 1996, bringing an end to a reign of terror that had haunted California's highways for years. Borderland, 2007. Borderland opens with a pretty harrowing sequence. Mexico City policeman Ulises and his partner enter an abandoned house adorned with occult symbols and animal carcasses. Minutes later, cult members force Ulises to watch as they cut out his partner's eyes and sever his head. They shoot Ulises in the leg but deliberately spare him to warn other officers away from intervening in their business.
Quiere que veas y le cuentes a tus putos amigos policías quién hizo esto.
This gruesome opening isn't just shock value, it's reality. Director Zev Berman based Borderland on the horrifying true story of Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo, a Cuban-American who led a substance trafficking cult along the Mexico-US border in the late 1980s. Constanzo, known as El Padrino, the Godfather, convinced followers that human sacrifices would make them invisible to law enforcement during substance runs. The film follows three American college graduates, Ed, Henry, and Phil, who cross into Mexico for a wild vacation. But their path intersects with the cult after Phil angers one of its members at a carnival. The night turns horrific when Phil disappears, forcing his friends into a desperate search that reveals the cult's sinister activities.
Santillán took your friend. There's nothing you can do.
So what are you saying? We should bail on a fellow Marine because of some lame Mexican voodoo cult?
People like that, they are capable of anything.
What makes Borderland profoundly disturbing is how closely it mirrors the real story. In March 1989, University of Texas student Mark Kilroy vanished during spring break in Matamoros, Mexico. That one disappearance triggered an international search that led authorities to Rancho Santa Elena, where they discovered Kilroy's remains among a lot of others, all of whom had been sacrificed ritualistically.
Police say 4 men already in custody have identified Constanzo and Aldrete as the ringleaders in a drug smuggling cult. Police say the two convinced their associates to 15 bodies in satanic sacrifices. University of Texas co-ed Mark Kilroy was one body dug up on a ranch south of the U.S.-Mexico border near Matamoros.
Constanzo's actual cult practiced an Afro-Caribbean religion that the group twisted into something monstrous. They believed harvesting organs, particularly brains and spinal cords, would grant them supernatural protection.
Escúchame, chango. Oye mi plegaria. Te entrego carne que sangra, un corazón que late en miedo, un alma que grita en dolor. Si esto te satisface, entonces danos el poder de andar a la luz del día y aún así permanecer en la sombra.
Bodies found at the ranch showed evidence of ritualistic with body parts boiled in a cauldron. The movie doesn't need to embellish anything. The truth behind Constanzo's activities doesn't need to be exaggerated to provoke fear and horror. When viewers realize that the young American who meets a terrible fate in the film represents a real person whose life ended under nearly identical circumstances, the horror becomes way more visceral than anything they could invent. Dahmer, 2002. Released in 2002, Dahmer stars Jeremy Renner in a disturbingly transformative performance as Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee man who took 17 lives between 1978 and 1991. The film abandons chronological storytelling, instead weaving between Dahmer's adult life in Milwaukee and flashbacks to his troubled youth. We witness his first victim in 1978, a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks, and how this single incident kickstarted a 13-year spree of unimaginable acts. But rather than focusing on each incident, the director focuses on exploring the psychology behind the man, portraying him as desperately lonely and alienated, resorting to violent methods to try and feel something in life.
You know how I said that my parents were on vacation? I was lying.
They coming home now?
No. That's not it. They're dead.
In one horrifying scene, Dahmer attempts to create living zombies by drilling holes into victims' skulls while they're unconscious and injecting hydrochloric acid into their brains. The film doesn't glance away from showing Dahmer's hand entering the cavity during this graphic incident, creating visceral discomfort for anybody who tries to sit through it. Of course, making a movie like this, exploring the psyche of a killer, means that it's going to be inevitably controversial. Many believe that the movie was humanizing Dahmer, that Renner's portrayal makes Dahmer sympathetic at times, just a soft-spoken outsider looking for connection.
Don't you see how you're being programmed? I mean, don't you see what's gonna happen? It's all there. You're gonna get married, then you're gonna get a boring job, at which point you're gonna become completely depressed.
When he doesn't get it, he lashes out in violent ways. This complexity disturbed audiences who expected a straightforward black and white villain. The central relationship between Dahmer and a character named Rodney provides the film's emotional core, which complicates Dahmer's character even more. Their extended conversation throughout one night creates tension as viewers know Dahmer's intentions while Rodney remains unaware of the danger.
You know what the cross was, don't you? Device. Used to kill criminals. You believe you have a soul? You know there's no pigeons that fly out of your body when you die.
And how many people you seen, Doctor?
You never know what will happen next, especially given the film's non-linear structure, which constantly disorients viewers, mimicking Dahmer's fractured psyche. Unlike other true crime adaptations, Dahmer focuses less on the acts themselves and more on the broken individual behind them. The movie exists for one reason: to ask us if we're capable of doing the same horrific deeds as Dahmer. Of course, Dahmer was the kind of guy who would never hit that subscribe button, so maybe that's something to consider before we move on to the next level. Level 3. Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer offers an unflinching look at the life of a drifter who takes lives without remorse or pattern. Filmed in 1985 on a meager $110,000 budget and released in 1986, director John McNaughton creates a documentary-style glimpse into the disturbing world of its protagonist. It feels real because it kinda was. The film draws inspiration from real-life figures Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole. Lucas claimed responsibility for hundreds of killings across America during the 1970s and early 1980s, though he later took back most confessions.
Like, say I'm the biggest mass murderer in the United States and everywhere else, you know. But I'm not.
Today, 8 years after confessing to more than 300 murders, Lucas says he made it all up.
The filmmakers took this notorious partnership as the foundation for their story, creating fictional scenarios based on fragments of truth. Michael Rooker delivers an uncomfortably convincing performance as Henry, partially because he remained in character throughout the entire 28-day shoot. Even off set, crew members never knew if they were talking to Rooker or Henry. So you just know making this movie was not the most comfortable, fun experience for anybody. The narrative follows Henry as he introduces his accomplice Otis to his methodology of randomly selecting victims. Their partnership escalates when they acquire a video camera, leading to one of cinema's most disturbing sequences. After invading a suburban home, they record their actions against an innocent, terrified family. Later, they watch the footage in their apartment, Henry appearing disinterested while Otis repeatedly rewinds particular moments, relishing in the violence they committed.
What are you doing?
The camera focuses on their reactions rather than the violence itself, highlighting the stark contrast between Henry's clinical detachment and Otis's growing enthusiasm. Both are deeply unsettling for very different reasons. One of them finds it so familiar it's boring, the other so joyful that he wants to keep going. The film's grainy 16mm aesthetic enhances this documentary feel, making viewers uncomfortable witnesses to events that feel eerily authentic. Unlike Hollywood depictions of calculated genius killers, Henry presents its protagonist as an ordinary man whose extraordinary capacity for violence makes him all the more terrifying. Kemper, the Co-Ed Killer. Kemper the Co-Ed Killer is a 2008 direct-to-video horror film loosely inspired by the crimes of serial killer Edmund Kemper. Loosely being the important word here. The film creates an entirely fabricated premise, with Detective Tom Harris enlisting his friend Ed Kemper, portrayed as an ordinary house painter living with his domineering mother, to help solve a series of disappearances in Santa Cruz.
Ma, I'm back.
So what are you gonna yell it for?
Take your pills, Ma.
Of course, the unsettling twist comes when Harris discovers his trusted friend is actually responsible for a different series of victims. The fictional dynamic drives the narrative, but actually it's not at all true. The actual Kemper never worked with law enforcement to solve crimes. Despite its many inaccuracies, the film does recreate one particularly disturbing real-life detail. In the movie's most horrifying sequence, Detective Harris discovers Mrs. Kemper's severed vocal cords in the garbage disposal. That really happened. In April 1973, the real Kemper eliminated his mother, removed her vocal cords, and attempted to destroy them in the disposal unit.
I said, she's gotta die. And I've gotta die. More girls like that are gonna die. And that's when I decided I'm going to murder my mother. I knew a week before she died.
But just as depicted in the film, the real-life garbage disposal couldn't break down the tough tissue and ejected them back into the sink. Kemper famously said, "That seemed appropriate, as much as she'd bitched and screamed and yelled at me over so many years." While the film climaxes with Kemper trying to take his own life, reality unfolded very differently. The actual Kemper drove to Colorado and voluntarily called the police to confess. When authorities initially didn't believe him, he persisted until they took him seriously. It's not the most dramatic ending. With a pretty bad 3.0 out of 10 IMDb rating, Kemper the Co-Ed Killer basically abandons all the facts for a more sensationalized thriller that sacrifices historical accuracy for shock value. You don't get any understanding of who Kemper was or why he did what he did, but you get some gore, I guess. Burdella, 2009. Burdella delves into the grim reality of one of America's lesser-known monsters, chronicling the activities of Robert Burdella, a man whose horrific actions in Kansas City during the 1980s earned him the nickname the Kansas City Butcher. The film stars Seth Correa as Bob Burdella, capturing the uncomfortable duality of a man who maintained a respectable facade while harboring unimaginable darkness. By day, Burdella runs Bob's Bizarre Bazaar, a peculiar shop at the Westport Flea Market selling occult items, human skulls, and other grim curiosities. This charming public persona allows him to blend seamlessly into his community, even becoming head of the Hyde Park Neighborhood Coalition and mentoring troubled young people, or should I say, victims. The director wisely avoids dwelling on the extreme acts of violence, choosing to show them as straightforward accounts of what transpired without attempting to explain the psychological motivations behind them. This approach makes the film even more disturbing because of what we don't know. We witness a monster operating in plain sight, his true nature hidden behind a veneer of helpfulness and community involvement. We don't know why he does what he does. This is just natural to him. One particularly unsettling scene shows Burdella hosting a poker game where he serves his unsuspecting friends chili, implied to contain human remains.
This tomato paste? Hell, it looks like blood.
The casual nature of this act highlights the serious disconnect in Burdella's mind, the absolute compartmentalization between his public and private lives. He doesn't think twice, he just does it. The film chronicles Burdella's activities between 1984 and 1988, during which he lured at least 6 young men to his home at 4315 Charlotte Street. His methods were calculated, offering shelter, substances, or companionship before subjecting his victims to unimaginable horrors. He documented these acts meticulously, taking over 1,000 Polaroid photographs and keeping detailed logs of his methods as he committed his legendary crimes. What makes Berdella effective as a horror movie is its restraint. Rather than exploitation, the film creates a character study of a mundane life masking true depravity. The film's low-budget aesthetic with its raw 16mm light quality enhances the documentary feel, making the horrors depicted seem all too real. It's like he exists, and we're just watching him commit unthinkable horrors. Hoboken Hollow, 2006. Hoboken Hollow draws its inspiration from the infamous Texas slave ranch case that shocked the nation way back in 1984. The film follows Trevor Lloyd, a war veteran drifting through Texas, haunted by his recent combat experiences. His journey takes a nightmarish turn when he accepts a ride from Clayton Connolly, who offers him work at a remote ranch. What Trevor discovers at Hoboken Hollow defies all comprehension. It's a brutal operation run by the Broderick family, where hitchhikers and the homeless are brought in and held as captives. The real-life inspiration is extremely disturbing. In April 1984, authorities raided the Elbracht Ranch in Kerr County, discovering evidence of atrocities, including bone fragments, weapons, and audio recordings of victims' suffering. The Elbrachts had been luring hitchhikers from Interstate 10 with promises of meals and shelter, only to chain them in a barn at night and subject them to unimaginable acts with cattle prods. The movie shows all of this, portraying these ordinary-seeming people committing extraordinary acts of cruelty. The Broderick family maintains a facade of mundane averageness while inflicting pain on those unfortunate enough to cross their path. One of the most disturbing scenes sees a young couple finding themselves at the mercy of the Broderick clan. Their initial relief at finding shelter quickly dissolves into horror as they're restrained and forced to ingest what they later discover are human remains. Turns out that's the Brodericks' way of introducing newcomers to the true nature of their operation. They turn human skin into jerky. The film received harsh criticism for its approach to its disturbing subject matter. Critics believed that the violence often feels empty and ineffective rather than genuinely frightening. It just exploited a genuine tragedy. The real Elbracht case saw authorities rescue 6 people who had been held against their will, but investigators suggested that the actual numbers of victims was likely much higher. In fact, the true number might never be known, making the real case far, far scarier than anything that could be captured on screen. Level 4. The Sacrament, 2013. The Sacrament follows Vice journalists Sam and Jake, who accompany their colleague Patrick to visit a secluded community called Eden Paris, where Patrick's sister Caroline has taken residence after recovering from addiction.
So here we are, about to leave New York City to set out to find your sister in a remote part of the world, see what this community she's living in is really all about.
But anybody who knows their history will know that this bizarre community is very, very familiar, because the film is deliberately mirroring the 1978 Jonestown tragedy, where over 900 members of the People's Temple perished in Guyana under the direction of the notorious Reverend Jim Jones.
Salutary kiss of greeting to your neighbor. Let's fill this atmosphere with warmth and love.
In the film, Eden Parish is led by a charismatic older Southerner known only as Father, brilliantly portrayed by Gene Jones, whose creepy performance echoes the real Jim Jones' manipulative control over his followers almost exactly.
What we lack in modern comfort, we make up for in humanity, isn't that right?
Upon arriving at Eden Parish, the journalists initially witness what appears to be a utopian community. Members seem happy, claiming Father saved them from their previous lives. However, the atmosphere shifts during a public interview when Father becomes evasive and suddenly threatening when questioned about the community's true nature.
When we came in, we noticed there were a few men with guns. If this is a pacifist community, why the guns?
A simple question. Do you love your wife? And what about that child you have on the way? When you start to put that spin on it, just know that you're dealing with their lives.
Just like the real Jim Jones, control is everything to Father. The tension quickly escalates when a young girl secretly passes a note to the visitors begging for help. The journalists soon discover a group of dissidents who wish to leave the commune, alleging they're being held against their will.
This place is not what it seems. They hurt people who go against the parish. Please, you have to help us. Father will not let us leave. We're prisoners here. You are being manipulated.
This mirrors the real-life Jonestown scenario where Congressman Leo Ryan's visit prompted some members to attempt an escape, leading to their tragic deaths. The movie culminates with a sequence mirroring the most well-known part of Jonestown. Father gathers everyone and commands them to drink cyanide-laced beverages, which everybody knows will end their lives. Those who resist are eliminated by armed guards.
This is the end for us. Our time has finally come. Some of the children have already been given the potion. We are heading for eternal life. Take it. Take it.
This horrific scene is exactly what happened in the real Jonestown tragedy, right down to the guards eliminating those who tried to survive. In fact, the real Jonestown deaths weren't all voluntary. Many victims were injected with poison, including approximately 300 young people.
A van carrying 50 victims arrived at Evergreen Cemetery. Inside, small pine boxes containing 45-inch steel caskets to be placed in cement crypts. These are the bodies of unidentified children. This is the first of 248 unidentified followers to be buried here.
Something that also happens in the film, as Patrick panics while his sister Caroline injects him with a syringe. The film captures the gradual escalation from utopian promise to fatal conclusion, showcasing how charismatic leaders can manipulate vulnerable people seeking community and purpose. The rise of a cult. The thing that makes The Sacrament particularly unsettling, however, is its documentary-style presentation, blurring the lines between fiction and reality, forcing viewers to witness events unfold through the journalists' cameras as they desperately try to escape the compound's horror. This is as close to being in Jonestown as you can possibly get, and it doesn't feel good. Angst, 1983. Gerald Cargill's Angst is an obscure movie, but for those who have seen it, it's one of the most unsettling things you will ever see.
Zu Beginn von Angst wird der Zuschauer darüber aufgeklärt, dass der Film auf einer wahren Begebenheit basiert.
Ja, der Film basiert auf einer Geschichte, die 2 Jahre vor dem Film tatsächlich vorgekommen ist in Österreich.
This 83-minute horror thriller follows an unnamed man who has just completed a 10-year prison sentence for taking an elderly woman's life. The film opens on the day of his release, immediately establishing his disturbing internal monologue through voiceover. The fear in her eyes and the knife in her chest. That's my last memory of my mother, he states coldly. Within hours of freedom, we discover that he is not reformed. He's already hunting for new victims, driven by an uncontrollable compulsion to harm.
Aber diesen Zwang, einen Menschen zu quälen, den habe ich nie ablegen können. Mir war klar, es wird wieder passieren. Es muss. Aber diesmal werden sie mich nicht erwischen.
The protagonist is modeled after Werner Kniesek, who committed similar acts in Austria in 1980. Just like the character in the film, Kniesek had been recently released from prison when he broke into the home of the Altreiter family in St. Pölten. He couldn't bring himself to stop. The film's most harrowing sequence mirrors Kniesek's real actions in an unthinkably savage attack. After failing to harm a taxi driver, the protagonist discovers an isolated house where he encounters a wheelchair-bound man with a disability. When the man's mother and sister return home, the protagonist hides before revealing himself to his new victims. He restrains the woman and then drags the helpless man upstairs to the bathroom. In an unflinching scene that is truly one of the most disturbing things ever caught on camera, he forces the disabled man's head underwater in the bathtub until he stops moving. The camera work by Zbigniew Wierchymski employs some innovative techniques you don't usually see in these kinds of movies. Overhead angles, body-mounted rigs, and uncomfortably close tracking shots that make viewers feel trapped in the protagonist's disturbed psyche. The director wants us to see the world through the eyes of a psychopath. And it does so for the entire runtime. The film continues to document his actions against the family with documentary-like precision. Throughout, Klaus Schulze's pulsing electronic score creates a sense of mounting dread. It is literally like being in the head of an insane, unhinged criminal. Angst was banned in numerous European countries upon release due to its graphic content. Unlike Hollywood productions that glamorize killers as charismatic geniuses, Angst presented its protagonist as clumsy, impulsive, and driven by primal urges rather than calculation, which may be more uncomfortable. The film refuses to look away from humanity's darkest impulses. That creative camera work forces us into uncomfortable proximity with acts we'd rather not witness, creating a visceral experience that lingers long after viewing. You'll never forget it, but you'll wish you could. The Golden Glove, 2019. Fatih The Golden Glove welcomes us to the grimy underworld of 1970s Hamburg in the life of Fritz Honka, a real-life who claimed at least 4 women's lives between 1970 and 1975. From its opening moments, the film establishes its uncompromising approach. We witness Honka committing his first act of violence against Gertrud Brauer in his squalid apartment. What follows is a meticulous depiction of him quartering the body, wrapping parts in plastic, and hiding remains behind a makeshift wall panel. The film's title refers to the dingy bar where Honka hunted for victims, primarily older alcoholic women living on society's margins. These forgotten souls, already broken by life's cruelties, became perfect targets for Honka's dark impulses. It's hard to pick out a single, most disturbing scene in this movie. Every scene is horrific. Every scene is disturbing. There's a prolonged attack involving glass bottles, made even more horrifying by its extended duration and the camera's refusal to cut away. Another scene shows maggots dropping through Honka's ceiling into a Greek family soup below, a grim consequence of the decomposing remains hidden in his walls. It's all horrific. In fact, in the last scene, the film doesn't avoid depicting Honka's revolting living conditions. His apartment becomes increasingly disgusting, requiring countless pine-scented air fresheners to mask the stench of decay. In real life, neighbors complained about the smell, but authorities disregarded their concerns until a fire in the building on July 15, 1975, led to the gruesome discovery of the remains. Were it not for the stench, he might have gotten away with it. The director faced criticism for the film's graphic content, but he defended his approach, stating, "My film is about violence, so I have to show it. How can I show how people are affected by violence? I have to show it realistically." It's hard to argue with his point, but it means that the movie is overwhelmingly disgusting. Level 5. The Texas Killing Fields, 2011. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of unsolved crime sprees all over the US. Few of them make it to the big screen, but Texas Killing Fields is a movie that did exactly that, following 2 detectives investigating a series of deaths in the Texas bayous. The plot follows these detectives tracking someone who's been taking young women's lives and disposing of their bodies in a marshy area locals call the Killing Fields. Though it's outside their jurisdiction, one of the detectives becomes obsessed with solving these cases. When a familiar local youth disappears, they race against time as the perpetrator begins hunting them, too. The screenplay draws inspiration from actual events that took place along a 30-mile stretch of Interstate 45 between Houston and Galveston. an area where over 30 individuals have perished since the 1970s with no explanation. These victims, primarily young people aged 12 to 25, were discovered in remote locations where, as one FBI agent noted, if they cried for help, it's unlikely anyone heard. In 1983, Heidi Fye disappeared, bringing newfound notoriety to the real killing fields, followed by Laura Miller's disappearance in 1984. Miller's father was initially told she had simply run away. During searches, authorities discovered 2 more victims who remained unidentified until 2019.
They are just 2 of the countless investigators over the years trying to solve the murders of more than 30 young women whose bodies were found in places like this desolate, abandoned oil field.
Part of what makes it such a perfect story for a film adaptation is the isolated nature of its central location. These fields are just a desolate stretch dotted with oil rigs and dirt roads. Even the movie's director found it unbelievably creepy, saying, "You could actually see the refineries. You could see I-45, but if you yelled, no one would necessarily hear you. And if you ran, there wouldn't necessarily be anywhere to go." The movie wasn't a hit when it released, but it was effective in the atmosphere and tone it set out to create. It was a disturbing reminder of the real tragedies that befell dozens of women, creating what one detective in the movie describes as a place of pure chaos. Or, to quote them, "Your God don't even come here." The Snowtown, 2011. The 2011 film Snowtown, directed by Justin Kurzel, documents one of Australia's most notorious criminal cases. Based on true events from 1992 to 1999, it delves into how John Bunting, a charismatic but deeply disturbing individual, worked his way into a vulnerable family in an impoverished Adelaide suburb. The story focuses on Jamie, a largely overlooked teenager living with his mother Elizabeth and his brothers. When Bunting enters their lives, he initially appears caring and protective, but his true nature gradually emerges as he expresses hatred for those he considers deviants and undesirables in society. Kurzel wanted to make the movie feel more unsettling and intense than your typical Hollywood-style approach, so he sought out non-professional actors from the real community, hoping to create a documentary-like atmosphere of authentic dread that feels uncomfortably real. So real, in fact, that some people cannot even watch to the end. In one sequence, Bunting coerces Jamie to end his dog's life as a test of his loyalty, something that Jamie reluctantly goes along with to prove himself. Another notorious scene involves victims suffering in a bathtub. A victim is restrained and subjected to cigarette burns, electrical shocks, and chemical injections, all real-life methods Bunting used to extract banking information from his targets before ending their lives. He and his associates were monsters, and the movie doesn't shy away from that. The real case became known as the bodies in barrels, after authorities discovered the remains of 12 individuals stored in acid-filled containers in an abandoned bank vault in Snowtown. Even though the town gave its name to the case, only one person actually lost their life there. But still, the film depicts with frightening accuracy how Bunting manipulated those around him, exploiting vulnerabilities and inciting serious hatred. He targeted individuals he claimed were threats to youngsters and those with lifestyles he despised. But all of it was rooted in his own selfishness.
John Bunting was born in 1966. He was an only child, which may have contributed to his narcissism and sense of self-importance.
Other movies might show more graphic or violent content than Snowtown, sure, but this movie doesn't want to disgust you. It wants to get under your skin, to leave you with the feeling that you just witnessed an actual psychopath at work. And the movie definitely pulls that off. Level 6. The Girl Next Door, 2007. The Girl Next Door is loosely based on Jack Ketchum's novel, which itself drew inspiration from the real horrific 1965 case of Sylvia Likens. The narrative unfolds in a seemingly idyllic suburban neighborhood during the summer of 1958, where recently orphaned sisters Meg and Susan Laughlin find themselves placed in the care of their aunt, Ruth Chandler. Obviously, nothing is as it seems. The film establishes a framing device right away. An adult named David Morin reflects on witnessing these events as a 12-year-old boy. Young David develops an innocent crush on Meg, unaware of the nightmare gradually unfolding next door. Because Aunt Ruth is not just strict, she's deeply disturbed. What begins as verbal humiliation of Meg rapidly escalates into physical violence.
And you're gonna turn out to be nothing but a honey. Do you know what a is?
Ruth ties her up in the basement, encouraging not only her sons but neighborhood children to participate in increasingly depraved acts against the helpless girl for no real reason other than the fact that she can. Pretty soon, the basement transforms into a chamber of horrors where Ruth's authority goes unchallenged and unchecked by any outside intervention. The film's most disturbing elements emerge in its unflinching depiction of what happens in that basement, much of which we can't really describe or show in any detail. But there are scenes where Ruth brands Meg's flesh with heated implements, carving degrading words into her skin, using blowtorches on highly sensitive areas in an act of pure sadism. It's insanely disturbing to see all of this unfolding, but we, like David, can't do anything. The core psychological horror at the heart of the movie is how ordinary children become willing participants, demonstrating the terrifying power of group dynamics and authority figures gone wrong. David's character represents the ultimate conflicted witness.
Bruce, you can't do this.
Can't?
It isn't right.
Horrified yet paralyzed by fear and confusion, unable to stop what's happening despite knowing it's wrong. But for us, the thing that is the most disturbing isn't just what we're seeing, it's that we know it's based on reality. While the names and specific details were changed, the real case involved a 16-year-old girl subjected to similar treatment by her caregiver and neighborhood youths over several months before her death. The real Sylvia Likens endured approximately 150 separate wounds across her body before succumbing to head trauma, malnutrition, and shock. She never stood a chance. Just a totally unfortunate victim of a psycho. The Girl Next Door doesn't sensationalize these events, it just presents them with a matter-of-fact brutality that forces viewers to confront humanity's capacity for cruelty, and our depressing willingness to go along with it when we know the consequences are unlikely to affect us. Wolf Creek, 2005. In 2005, Wolf Creek, a small Australian horror movie, hit the big screen. Nobody was prepared for what they were about to see. The marketing had promised a movie based on true events, though many outside of Australia had absolutely no idea what that even meant. At its core, Wolf Creek follows three backpackers, Liz Hunter, Christy Earle, and Ben Mitchell, who become stranded when their car breaks down at Wolf Creek National Park in the Australian outback. Their apparent salvation arrives in the form of Mick Taylor, a seemingly friendly local bushman who offers to tow their vehicle to his camp and repair it.
I could give you a tow, fix it tonight, probably have you on the road by the morning.
But obviously, this initial kindness isn't Australian hospitality. It just conceals Taylor's true nature as a psychopathic monster who takes pleasure in the suffering of others. In reality, Taylor is based on two real Australian killers. Ivan Milat, known for the backpacker killings, who took the lives of 7 young travelers in New South Wales, and Bradley John Murdoch, who was convicted of killing a British tourist and attacking his girlfriend on a remote stretch of highway. The director just borrowed elements from both cases, creating a fictional villain who embodies their predatory methodology without stealing the real story. Now, there are a lot of horrifying scenes we could highlight in this movie, but maybe the most disturbing of all involves Liz's fate. After attempting to escape, she is caught by Taylor, who stabs her in the back with his Bowie knife. He then proceeds to cut off her fingers during the struggle before severing her spinal cord. This action renders her completely paralyzed from the neck down, making her into what Taylor describes as a
head on a stick.
It's unthinkably graphic nightmare fuel, and of course, it's based on reality. The spine-severing concept reportedly draws from accounts related to Malat's real victims, although medical experts have questioned the practicality of such an injury causing complete paralysis without causing immediate death. Either way, the film's director used it purely as a tool to amplify the audience's horror by suggesting these acts might have some basis in reality. Because ultimately, Wolf Creek doesn't shy away from depicting brutality. When Mick captures the backpackers, he subjects them to various forms of physical harm, and he has so much fun doing it that you can't help but feel pretty damn nauseous watching the whole thing unfold. Level 7. 2006. Marian Doras draws heavily from the shocking case of Armin Meiwes, who posted an online advertisement seeking a young, well-built man who wanted to be eaten. As we know, 43-year-old engineer Bernd Brandes responded to this peculiar request, willingly offering himself as a meal. In this movie, the film presents its characters simply as the man and the flesh, mirroring their functional relationship. There's no emotion, no real connection between them other than their base purpose, to eat and to be eaten.
I'm your flesh.
After connecting online, the two meet at the man's isolated farmhouse where they develop an unusual bond. What follows is a deliberately paced exploration of their relationship before culminating in the film's most horrific sequence, which kind of seems inevitable from the very beginning. In one of the movie's most shocking scenes, the flesh urges the man to bite off his genitalia, but the man cannot seem to bring himself to complete the act. Undeterred by his hesitation, the flesh consumes alcohol and pills before instructing the man to use a kitchen knife for castration instead.
Castrate me. Then me.
Once that deed was done, they fry up the severed organ, and the pair attempt to consume it. It's everything that you think it's going to be, and worse. The flesh, bleeding profusely, is placed in a bath while the man prepares a room for dismemberment. But he soon discovers the flesh is still alive, prompting him to stab his victim's throat in a last-ditch effort to eliminate him. What follows is a methodical process of beheading, gutting, and dismembering the body. The man buries all of the inedible parts and cooks and consumes the rest, placing the flesh's severed head at the table during his macabre feast. It's a pretty grim sight to behold. The movie looks horrible, which really works for the subject matter. They only had a budget of around $2,000, so the movie had to achieve its disturbing realism through its documentary-like approach and convincing practical effects. And it does a damn good job, even if people disagree on its content. Some view it as beautifully crafted art house horror that unflinchingly examines human depravity, while others condemn it as one of the most vile, repulsive, and disgusting films ever made. In Germany, the film was eventually confiscated by authorities and banned from sale under laws prohibiting certain graphic content. So it's safe to say the movie definitely had an impact. Men Behind the Sun, 1988. In 1988, TF Mao released Men Behind the Sun, a Hong Kong film depicting the stomach-churning operations of Japan's Unit 731 during World War II.
You got the idea to make Black Sun 731 or Men Behind the Sun around this time. How you got there?
I had contact with a lot of people, local people. I heard the story of 731. I said, well, that's important thing.
Now, what makes the film particularly unsettling isn't just its graphic content, but the fact that it portrays actual historical events that claimed an estimated 200 to 300,000 lives through unbearable, unthinkably awful experimentation. The film follows Japanese troops capturing Chinese and Russian prisoners, taking them to a facility where they become unwilling subjects in biological weapons experiments. These individuals, dehumanized and referred to as logs, endure unimaginable suffering at the hands of medical staff led by Surgeon General Shiro Ishii.
正确的资料要靠实验材料连续使用来获得，所以这些马路大不仅都要是活的，而且必须是身体非常健康的。能用活体做实验，机会是很难得的。
The visceral imagery begins early into the runtime when a Japanese officer takes an infant from its mother, tosses it in the snow, and kicks more snow over it to silence its cries. Obviously, anybody watching the movie for the first time is going to be shocked and horrified by what they've just seen, but it's about to get significantly worse. Among the film's most notorious sequences is one where a woman has her arms frozen in icy water, then dipped in hot water, allowing researchers to peel away her skin entirely. Another shows a man placed in a decompression chamber until his body swells grotesquely and his intestines forcibly exit his body. But the scene that stands out the most for those brave enough to make it to the end is the treatment of a mute Chinese boy who befriends young Japanese soldiers. When officers convince the soldiers to bring the boy to the facility, he's tricked into lying on an operating table, anesthetized with ether, and subjected to a live dissection.
这下都满意了吧？是啊。现在要心的拿到了心了，要肝的有肝了，要脑子的拿到了脑子了。
Rumors persist that real bodies were used in filming this scene, though the director has frequently denied this.
This scene was composed of several elements, mainly footage of the actors, footage of a sedated pig having its heart removed for close-up shots, and the autopsy of a real child.
We try to get at the body to match our acting, but we can't.
However, there is footage featuring real live harm being committed upon living things. A scene showing a cat thrown into a room of hungry rats was cut by British censors, and footage of rats being burned alive remains controversial for its seeming authenticity. Given the seeming impossibility of faking these scenes, it's believed that they are real.
If you'll talk about the cat scene, was the cat actually killed?
No, the cat didn't kill.
It looks like you guys just covered him up with syrup.
Just some color with honey.
Men Behind the Sun received a Level 3 classification in Hong Kong, equivalent to an NC-17 in America, and was banned in Australia before being re-rated R18 on appeal. Despite its exploitation elements, supporters argue it serves an important historical purpose, revealing atrocities that might otherwise remain forgotten. But whether the graphic depiction undermines that purpose, you be the judge. Thanks for watching. If you still want more TV and movie icebergs, why not check out this video on the most disturbing actor and actress controversies.